Okay, so we're going to start off by just asking each of the speakers to introduce themselves and through that to kind of explain to us why they're interested in admissions policy to economics, if that's what's relevant to them, or generally. So Stephen, I think I'll start with you.
Thank you, Clodagh. So welcome, everyone. My main interest in admissions policy comes from actually a range of different environments. First of all, from a practical environment, I'm the Director of Undergraduate Studies at Bristol for our economics programs. So I do need to keep a good eye on what we're looking for within students and thinking about how we match students to our undergraduate programs. Along with that, my research interests are very much in the area of education, trying to think about how we improve students and what are the determinants of success. And I've also done quite a bit of writing in the recent years, looking at the impact of COVID-19 and the adjustments that were made to A-levels. I've written a number of articles for the Economics Observatory looking at precisely the impact of COVID-19 on A-level results. And that ties in quite a lot with some of the work that I suspect that Richard's going to speak about in a few minutes.
Great, thank you, which passes us nicely over to Richard Murphy, or Rich. If you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your work linked to the admissions policy, Rich. But don't tell anything all at once.
Okay. Thanks for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm an economist at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm interested in the economics of education, like K through 12 and, post-secondary education. And like any economist, I'm interested in markets and markets working efficiently. And what's been seen, internationally is that disadvantaged students, even conditional on ability, are less likely to be enrolling in the best universities in their countries compared to more advantaged students. So me and my co-authors have done a few papers trying to look at, what are the market failures that are causing this? Like, is it asymmetric information? Are the students uninformed about this? Is it credit constraints? Can they just not afford it? Is it like the measurement of ability causing problems? Or, or is it on the university side of the market? Maybe universities aren't accepting these students. And so we've done a series of papers trying to investigate each of these in turn and see which is important and which is less important. And the admission process itself seems to be like an important thing that we need to look at and hasn't really been studied much because people seem to be focused on credit constraints like money, whereas the system itself could be an issue.
Thank you. And finally, Kevin, do you want to introduce yourself and your interest in this area?
Yeah, so my name is Kevin Denny. I'm at the School of Economics in University College Dublin. For my sins, they made me head of school in September. But before that, I used to do research. And so economics of education is one of the areas I'm interested in. And I've done work looking at transition from second to third level, various papers on that. An area I'm particularly interested in is the role of socioeconomic disadvantage in regards transitioning from second to third level and looking at educational production. And I've also been involved in the policy space in Ireland as a big there are several interventions to try and address these socioeconomic gradients, and I've been very heavily involved in reforming that. So that's why I think it was something on Twitter I said that prompted Claude to ask me. I'm constantly getting into trouble because of things I say on Twitter. Someday I'll learn the lesson.
I think that applies to all of us. Thank you all very much. I guess it may be worth explaining two things for those who haven't been at our seminars before. They are very informal. So it is very much on the having a chat about an important issue so that people can feel free to talk. But as part of that, we do encourage the audience to put questions into the chat, and they can get passed to me to ask the audience, or you can just make comments yourself on anything that you hear. We will have Dunny will also be monitoring the YouTube to see if there's any questions coming in from there. But I think what you've heard from all three speakers so far is very much, so when Parama and Steffi and I were thinking about this topic, it was very much in the context of the diversity or lack of in economics students, not only in the UK, everywhere, and really wondering, so in the UK we have something called contextual offers, which are sort of slightly reduced A-level admission criteria, but is that enough to be encouraging students to apply to economics and for the universities to let them in, as was indicated? So we were very much coming at this. So we will be having a second seminar also looking at how we can support students when they get to university, who come from more disadvantaged backgrounds, to help them achieve their potential when they get there. So today is about, can we find them, those that have the potential and the curiosity and the passion. And then in January, we'll have another seminar looking at, once we find them, how can we support them? So with that in mind, and given that we have people from different university systems with us, let's think about the UK first. So admissions are based on an application to UCAS, based on predicted grades for what used to be national end of school exams, but obviously we haven't really had that for 2 years already. And then students write a personal statement, they get references from a tutor or a teacher, and the universities make their offers based on those predicted grades. So Rich, first question to you, what do you think the benefits and downside of that approach are for the students, particularly those who maybe aren't well represented in economics?
Okay, so I think I had a lot of thoughts about this, and I condensed it to the good points that I'm going to say first, and then like the less good point, which is basically going to be predicted grades. And the nice features of the UK system, especially for more disadvantaged students or students that who may be less integrated into post-secondary education, is it's very centralized, right? And this is great for a number of reasons. It makes it easy for students to make comparisons across courses. You get the UCAS book or the UCAS website now, and all the universities are in the same format, and it makes it easy to make comparisons. You may be looking at universities that you hadn't previously considered, which is great. And there's a single fee to apply to all the universities, which is unlike many different countries where, or at least like particularly the US, where you're applying to each university separately and nothing's centralized. So it's just costly to apply to a bunch of different universities. So centralized is great. The assessment used for admissions is integrated into the national curriculum, which is another great thing. Like we may take it for granted that students are assessed on A-levels, and A-levels are part of the national curriculum, but we have other assessments across the globe, like the US, where they have SATs, and students are assessed on the basis of how well they do on this test, which is not necessarily aligned to what they're being taught in classes. So if disadvantaged students aren't preparing for the SATs because they're just studying for what they learn in classes, then they're going to be at disadvantage. Predicted grades have some benefit because it allows the student to it provides them with some information so they can focus in on, am I likely to be eligible to get into this course? Combined with the centralized system means they can make informed choices. And lastly, the conditional or contextualized offers also has some use because there's like an incentive for students to try hard in the last term. Whereas, so like they need to try hard, they need to get the grades to get into the university. Whereas other systems, students may be accepted by January of that year, and then the last term is wasted. And so people are concerned that, the kids got into this university and they just coast from February onwards and they don't really learn anything. And so that's wasted time. So these are all good things about the UK system. The bad feature, at least you know, my big bugbear about the UK system is it's predicated on predicted grades, and that determines which university students apply to and which which students get conditional offers. And I've got a paper with Jill Winus, and I was just going to show you some pictures from this, if I can click through. So the big issue is predicted grades aren't very accurate. So this is all unique applications to the UCAS system in 2015, I think. Only 16% of teacher predictions are accurate. 75% of teachers overestimate how well the student's going to do. So -1 here means the predicted grade was 1 grade higher out of the best 3, and -2 is, you know, they predicted A, and they got A, B, B, right? And only 9% are under predicted, right? And so what we have is large inflation in the grades, which we saw, you know, 2 summers ago. And this inflation is split. You know, not everyone is as affected by predicted grades as other people. What we see is we split who's over and unpredicted by the richest and poorest students. And what we see on average is the poorest students are over predicted and the richest students are under predicted, right? And so we can see, if we look at the -5, the largest column is for the poorest students and the shortest column is for the richest students. And so what we'll be seeing here is, you know, disadvantaged students are more likely to be over predicted in the raw, and we see a similar situation for white students compared to non-white students. White students are more likely to be under predicted and less likely to be over predicted, and the opposite is true for minority students. So we may be thinking like, well, predicted grades seems to be giving an advantage to disadvantaged students in the UK system, but this is simply a feature of, it's really hard to over predict someone who gets 3 A's, because if they get 3 A's, you've just got it exactly right. And it's really easy to over predict people who do poorly. And so what we do in our paper is like we account for how well the student actually does in their A levels. And then we see, do people from different backgrounds, were they under or over predicted, accounting for how well they actually did. And what we found is, like, overall, on average, the most disadvantaged students are over predicted by like a quarter of a grade. But once we account for like how good they are, among the high achievers, the most disadvantaged students are under predicted by 0.006 of a grade, which doesn't sound like much, but it's like more than 1 in 20 low in of the most disadvantaged students are going to be under predicted by a grade. So they'll be predicted AAB instead of AAA. And we do the same for students in state schools versus private. On average, they're over predicted by 0.36. But compared to students in the private sector, state school students are under predicted by 0.17 grades, which means, you know, what school you attend and what family background you come from is impacting what grades you're predicting. And then we see the consequences of these predicted grades. If you're under predicted, you're 11 percentage points less likely to apply to a Russell Group university. You're 10 percentage points more likely to apply to a university that you're overqualified for, like, and we define that as like you're better than everyone else at the university. So if you're under predicted, you're going to be going to universities where you're overqualified, and you're 6.9% more likely to attend a university that you're overqualified for. So it's not just the applying thing, but it's also like these students end up at universities where they're overqualified for. And I think that's our big bugbear. Is like the predicted grades are so off, and they're impacting students' application patterns and ultimately where they end up. And it's not that everyone's impacted the same.
Thanks, Rich. That's really interesting, and as Prama said in the chat, quite worrying. But also gels well with what. So one of the issues we have at UCL is, even if we wanted to make offers to all the disadvantaged students who applied, they're not applying. And I think that's one of the biggest issues, is that they're kind of discouraged from applying based on their predicted grades, or even this kind of culture that they're in, which I'm sure Bristol had a similar issue, Steve. And so I was just wondering if you could give some perspective on the benefits and downsides of the UK system from the perspective of the universities, and whether you think it's helping or hindering getting good students in.
Thanks. I mean, I'll just start reflecting on some of the things that Richard said as well. One of the interesting elements of a lot of the research of the disadvantaged students compared with some of the more advantaged students when it comes to university performance is that having conditioned on grades, students from state schools actually outperform those students from private schools. So once students get into the university, they perform and they outperform those students. So there's already a signal that something's going wrong with even A-level grades as a predictor for how students are going to do on undergraduate degrees. One of the big problems that exists with the UK system is not just an aspect of the application system, but it's an aspect of the entire paradigm that we work under, in that there are gatekeepers. There are gatekeepers in several places when you're thinking about applying to university. For economics programs, one of the big gatekeepers on an awful lot of economics programs is your choice of A-levels. You may not know at age 16 that you want to study economics. You might think, well, I want to study something social sciencey. Well, I'll take some written subjects at A-level. You may not realize that A-level maths is a core subject which is required across a very wide number of undergraduate economics programs. So A-level maths acts as a gatekeeper into BSc economics in a lot of universities. So without that knowledge, you're effectively prevented from applying. And this is one of the first gatekeepers that we run into, that students may or may not know about. This creates a point where you have asymmetric information, where advisors may not, advisors from schools in all environments may not be able to give that advice. Actually, if you think you might have any wish to study economics, go and study maths first of all. And this is something that is not just a UK problem. We see this a lot reflected in the States as well, where students who are interested in doing doctoral programs in economics, the first mistake that you make is not doing significant maths study in your undergraduate courses. So that's the first gatekeeper. But there are other gatekeepers as well. The GCSE results that you've attained act effectively as a gatekeeper, because a lot of institutions use a weighted scoring system based partly on GCSEs, partly on the predicted A-levels, partly potentially on your personal statement, partly on references. And those GCSEs act as a gatekeeper. The personal statement can act as a gatekeeper. Some institutions place more weight on personal statements than others. But knowing how to write that personal statement, being able to get the advice on how to write that personal statement, it acts as a gatekeeper. Those who have experience of higher education can give better advice on what's necessary in a personal statement to tick the boxes to get an offer from the institution. Some institutions are paying much less focus on personal statements for this precise reason, that the personal statement itself, it may well just be a reflection of your background. And then the predicted grades are another gatekeeper, as the results that Richard has suggested or shown in those from disadvantaged backgrounds at the top end are being underpredicted. It's leading to, because those predictions are so important for making the offer, then it's difficult to get that match. Now, we'll talk later about what else we could do, but one of the problems that we run into is just the paradigm that we're existing in. The paradigm where we're having students studying A-levels, we're examining them in A-levels. The A-levels are acting as the final gatekeeper into universities. We've got a system whereby students apply before they've got the results, and then universities have to effectively make offers based on what they think students are going to get. And they're effectively creating a system where they're making offers under the assumption that not everyone's going to make those offers, and they're having to make their best guess of how to best get the match between the number of offers that they make and the number of students that accept them. So we get a real problem in terms of matching. Now, at this point, I think I'll pass back to Clodagh.
Thanks, Stephen. So I mean, what we're seeing is, obviously for universities, as Rich was alluding to, for students, there is an advantage to this centralized system. It's very straightforward. You get to make your offers, 9 months before students are arriving. You can organize yourself. But there are other systems out there. And one of the reasons why I invited Kevin was because in Ireland, where I'm from, we do have a centralized system. We have the CAO system. We do have, end of school exams that are linked to the curriculum. So we have some similarities to the UK system. Arguably, one of the advantages in Ireland is that you have to do maths. So that gets taken out of your hands as a choice, or at least you have less choices you have to make at 16. But what happens, which is different, is, well, in my day, the night that offers come out, you go and you buy the Irish Times newspaper and your student number is listed and it tells you what course you've got after you've got your Leaving Cert results. I'm sure these days it's slightly more sophisticated. So these are post-qualification offers that you get. So Kevin, as someone who works in this system, obviously now as head of department, but also as a researcher, can you explain what the benefits, but also the downsides are of the post-qualification approach that is used in Ireland and in many other countries?
Yeah, I mean, it has something in common with the centralized system is obviously quite similar to the UK, and it's very efficient. It's kind of brutally efficient. So people sit their final exams in June, and normally the results come out mid-August. Obviously things were affected by COVID, but that's the normal thing. Then the CAO, the Central Applications Office, get to work their magic, and then the offers come out. There's several rounds because people might turn down their first offer. Those offers get recycled, and so there's generally a couple of second, third round, maybe even a fourth. And then people start in whenever they start. It's September. It used to start in October. It's gradually moved back earlier into September for the universities. And so there's basically 7 universities. Well, there were traditionally kind of 7 universities. Now we're doing what the UK did, converting, like when you converted your polys to universities. Same thing is happening here. One difference, first of all, our final exam is like a baccalaureate type exam. So it's more like Scottish Highers. So you do a lot of subjects, 8 or 9 subjects, the best 6 count. And everyone has to do maths. Everyone has to do the Irish language, although a lot of people are able to get out of that for various reasons. And so it's based on your actual grades. And so to us, predicted grades just seems really weird. Now, when COVID hit, the government wanted to start using predicted grades because it couldn't hold exams. and there's a lot of pushback from teachers. And the reason is that the teachers often live in the same community as their pupils, their students, and they know the parents, and they were just worried about, about pressure and getting hassle. Now, I don't know if that's an issue in the UK, but it was certainly, that was what motivated the teachers. The issue of accuracy, people didn't really raise. I remember quoting the work of Richard and his colleagues, pointing to this inaccuracy, but that wasn't what was primarily bothering people. So the system is fairly efficient in that sense, in sense of using the information that's provided, and the information is kind of accurate in terms of an accurate assessment of how they do in the exams. Now, there's issues about whether the exams are fair, in some sense. There is contextual information taken into account in quite a complicated way. In the last 10 years, there's a system that takes into account socioeconomic background. I've been involved in dismantling that and replacing it with something better. It would take me an hour to explain it, so I won't even try. But the issue really is that socioeconomic disadvantage starts early. It doesn't start when you're 18. It starts when you're younger, maybe in utero, for all we know. And it's very hard to really reverse that process. And it's also, a lot depends. It's not just poor kids come from poor families. They live in poor communities. They go to poor schools. So there's so many things. They're all highly correlated. So it'd be hard to disentangle what's driving it, So I don't want to sound too complacent and think that our system is perfect. It's procedurally fair anyway. The outcomes aren't necessarily fair because of the inputs of that society produce rather than the exam system. So I don't think there's any great demand to have predicted grades here. They're fairly efficient, and it takes here, you finish your exams in June and the results are out in August. The French baccalaureate, it's out much quicker as far as I know. So it can be done if you want to.
Yeah, that brings me nicely to the question that's in the chat, which is, I guess, the big pushback against using post-qualification grades here, which is, how do you possibly put out offers at the end of August and still have students registered and ready to go in the middle of September?
Not a problem.
That's not the way it's organized now here, but it's obviously feasible because you do it.
Well, the other thing I'd say is that, if at present you're finding that difficult to do, start the exams, start your A-levels 2 weeks earlier. Like, if you're spending 5 or 6 years in university, lopping off 2 weeks at the end, it's not going to make a huge difference to their learning outcomes. So I wouldn't I'd say,
so
do the A-levels when you need to.
Yeah. So I think that, that is quite good advice, that if you need 4 weeks to get sorted between offer and admissions, then you work backwards from that. The other thing it's probably worth maybe saying a little bit about, Kevin, is one of the issues that we've had in the last 2 years in some universities, but not all, is because the actual A-levels have been very high, we've ended up with really high numbers coming into our first years, because we don't have a fixed supply, so we don't have the cap. These are not necessarily the students from the backgrounds that we were hoping to attract. They're still sort of more of the same. But I guess one of the issues in Ireland is it feels like with the point system, you're a bit more able to control your supply. Is that true, or is that issue still there in Ireland?
The supply curve is vertical, basically. So there's a fixed number of places. And so as the demand goes up, the points goes up. It's a kind of very simple supply and demand system. So the points have gone up, and because of COVID, because of the way they kind of loosened the system. So points did go up, but that's, it's like inflation. It's kind of neutral. Now, the only difference is that people who did their exams before COVID and had postponed entering university, they're coming in with pre-COVID points, competing against their peers who are a year younger. And they've been on, and actually there's a non-trivial amount of people in that situation. So that's a kind of a short-run inequity. And when COVID stops and hopefully we go back to the normal system, that will reverse. So that's it's a bit like, that's what inflation does when you have fixed incomes for some. I mean, so we have, for example, the hardest course in Ireland to get into in anywhere in the country is a degree in economics and finance in my university, which is run by our business school, but we teach economics. And you need to get kind of absolutely stellar performance. You need to be in the top 1% in the country to get into it. Now, a consequence of that is that, those people are all going to be from well-off backgrounds, because there's a very strong socioeconomic gradient. It's something I worked on years ago. And I wasn't the first to discover it, but, there's a very strong socioeconomic gradient in secondary level attainment. And that's what drives to a large extent, what drives the socioeconomic gradient to access. So poor kids are not going to get into medicine. They're not going to get into economics and finance. They're not going to get into vet, dentistry, law, those prestigious professional type professions, because they're coming from, I'm from that background myself, and I know that's how it worked, and that it's changed a bit in recent decades, but not nearly enough.
So it's useful to know that post-qualification doesn't help with this issue around diversity and inclusivity.
Oh, no.
Richard or Steve, any comments on the idea of the UK moving to a post-results system? I know the Office for Students are consulting on it at the moment.
I'll jump in. Myself, Jill Winus and Lindsay McMillan, we submitted a guide for how the UK could do a post-qualifications applications system, right? That A should be for applications rather than admissions. And the real issue with the current system is how long it takes to get the grades out to students. We think that's the big issue with the UK system. So currently we do A levels in like May and June, and then we have to wait till like mid-August for the students to get their grades, and then they're basically automatically assigned to a university, and then we have another few weeks to get into the university. And the pushback against the post-qualifications applications is like, how are we going to do this? We don't want to leave students stranded in the middle of summer with no guidance or no advice into applying to universities, and the universities will have very short amount of time to deal with all the students applying in mid-August. And we agree, like, having students apply in August would be a bad idea. The way to deal with this is to get the grades to the students earlier, and you could do that by compressing the exam timetable, compressing the grading period, and compressing/removing the need for UCAS to have all that A-level results weeks in advance of everyone else and the students. And so we did a survey, not an exhaustive international survey, but we did do a survey of other countries and how they compare. We include Ireland in this because they're closest to us. And so we have a very long university examination period. Like, we've got the longest by far of these other countries. And A levels, there's lots of different A levels, so that makes it more complicated. But last year during COVID, the government was proposing to reduce it down to 20 days. So the government thinks that it could be done in 20 days. The grade assignment period is very long. Like, this is we take about 9.7 weeks to get the grades back to the students, whereas like a lot of countries take around a month. Ireland's closest to us, and many countries take about 2 weeks. And from talking to the exam boards, it seems like they get the grading done in 2 weeks. The grading is done in 2 weeks, and that's not what's holding up. The difference between the 2 and the 9 is the coordination across exam boards of this grade in like this question in this exam, how much should this be worth? This grade in this exam, how much should this be worth? And it's all about the calibration of test scores across exam boards, and no exam board wants to be, you know, left with their kids getting under awarded, undergrading, right? So it's, well, I'm choosing the word grading rather than marking, because the marking doesn't take that long. It's the grading and the putting out of the grades is taking a bunch of time. And then, you know, this is how long universities get to decide who goes where, right? And so the UK, this is the end of the application period for the student, and so placement is a lot of days in the UK, whereas in other countries, you know, students can state their preferences, and depending on what grades they get, they would go to these universities. And so what we propose is a system where the students would still take their exams in May and June. The results will get back to them by the end of July, and in the in-between period, they'll be, instead of, you know, not doing anything, they'll be given advice about which universities could they apply to. Then they'll get the grades, university they apply to, and finance, and other important things that students should know about university. Then they get the grades. Then they would know which grades they have, and then they could rank the universities they want to attend, and send them off. And then the universities would be more informed about what the students actually achieved rather than their predictions. So the students will be applying on what they actually got, and they will be based on their achievements that they actually got. And the universities would still have 6 to 8 weeks to decide which students they want to take or what not to take. So if they want to take into account non-A-level features, like if they want to do interviews, whatever, they still have, you know, a month and a half to 2 months to do that. And yeah, well, that's you know, we think it's feasible, I guess.
It sounds very feasible. And one of the other advantages for, I think, is somebody making a choice in the summer after year 13 rather than at the start of year 13 could be quite a formative thing for a lot of 17, 18-year-olds. Actually, that time period, they could change quite a lot.
And there's a lot of A-levels that get a lot harder in the last year.
Yeah, yeah,
like,
no, exactly.
I'm really good at physics, and you're like, oh, actually, I'm not good at physics.
Yeah, or I've had enough of physics, I'd imagine. Question in the chat for you, Rich, around the survey that you did, the international comparison, was how you conducted it and how you chose the sample. So was it existing data, or? It
was quite arbitrary. I reached out to people I knew in all the countries, and then I got a bunch of RAs to get the details on, like, just like when the, like, I have found some RAs from a bunch of different countries and got them to like research it in their respective countries for the last 2 years, and took the averages of what they were doing prior to COVID. And so what was the release date? What was the post date? Like, all the information's out there. It feels like when we talk about policies, we really talk about the UK and like our traditions and like this is how we do it, rather than like, it doesn't take that long to do these things because other countries do it and it's fine.
Absolutely. Steve, any comment on that sort of point from Bristol? Would they be up for it?
Well, I'm not going to speak for Bristol, but what I would say is currently we have industries across universities which are admissions officers, and admissions officers work non-stop from September through to August. First of all, deciding who to make offers to, then when it comes to the summer period, deciding who, where you're going to, whether you're going to enter clearing, where you're going to set your threshold for students that you're going to accept through near misses, and a post-qualification application removes an awful lot of the uncertainty. Effectively, it allows for a better match in both directions. In terms of students have a better idea of where they're performing well, what their grades are, and so where they can actually aspire to get places at. universities are able to observe the performance of students and say, well, actually, that's a much better match for us. So it lowers a lot of the information asymmetry that currently exists, and allows for much better matching. I mean, if you're being absolutely extreme, you could say, well, why do we even need admissions to be dealt with at a university level? Why not use some kind of Gale-Shapley algorithm and do it centrally via UCAS? Certainly, if all that's being used in terms of making offers is the achieved grades, that would be there would be no reason why you actually then need the universities to look at the actual applications. But this does begin to, if all that you were to do was to match on observable characteristics based on results, even if you contextualize them, that does raise an issue that you're effectively going to miss students because of the point that Kevin made. Disadvantage is not something that happens at age 18. It's not something that happens at age 16. It's something that happens all the way through individuals' lives. You can see that in terms of the schools that people attend. There's post-residential sorting into, so first of all, there's residential sorting into ethnicities, into diversity groups, which look similar to each other. Then there's post-residential sorting, which means that the schools end up looking even more similar. And you have students from better off backgrounds getting access to better off schools and leading to better off grades. So there is a question about how you then think, well, how do we make sure that the people who most deserve it, well, deserve is a loaded term, but how you ensure that people who are going to benefit from university education genuinely get access. And ultimately, tinkering around at age 18 will make a difference, but it's not, you need to go way, way back. And some of the political decisions that have been made, particularly over the last 10, 11 years in the UK, of some of the removal of some of the early interventions may be having more negative impacts later down the line.
So a lot of this sounds like it's potentially about resources or where you use your resources. So if we took half a year of the admissions team's work off their hands and got them to spend more time going out to schools, possibly even primary schools, and talking to them about, being aspiring and those kind of things, that actually might be, where that resource could be used, but it probably does need extra resource. I did wonder, and I'm not sure any three of you could answer this, but do you think the fact that there's so many overseas students in the UK affects any of this as well? I mean, I know quite a lot of them do A-levels, but in Ireland there are overseas students, but maybe not as high a proportion. And I'm just wondering if that mix of, for overseas students, do they need to know that they're coming to the UK in September, and how early do they need to know that, and whether that's a factor at all in moving to a different system?
I did a paper about what's the impact of the number of international students on domestic students, and see if there's like a displacement effect or like a substitution effect, or does the growing number of international students subsidize domestic students? And basically what we find is prior to the student cap on numbers, increases in international students had no impact on the number of domestic students for undergrad, and then post removal of the student numbers cap, there was a positive relationship, like more international students led to more domestic students using a shift share instrument. And at the postgrad level, we find that there's a clear positive relationship. So it seems like the more international students, the more domestic students you have. We have like a Bartik shift share thing to get around all the endogeneity issues.
Again, Stephen, any thoughts?
Yeah, so this may sound slightly cynical, but Currently, we already have differential systems for home and international students. In the international students experience a different fee level from home students in the UK. So there is no reason that you couldn't use a home application system, which might be post A levels, and a international application system which runs earlier. We know well from experience, we've seen at postgraduate applications that international students, there's different times when different students apply within the calendar. Speed of response is important for students from different nations, as I say, this might sound on the cynical side, but the aims of the two policies may well be very different. In that home recruitment, we're very much thinking about how we might diversify that pool from less advantaged backgrounds within the UK. There's then the question about what the pool of students applying from overseas should look like.
Good answer. So I think we've about 10 minutes left. And I think, so one of the things I'm taking from this whole discussion is post-qualification may help with quite a lot of the uncertainty with predictions, but won't necessarily help with helping the disadvantaged to be better matched with the universities where they have the potential to do well, but aren't getting in. Kevin, I know you didn't want to tell us all the details of what you're working on and contextualization, but have you got like a 1-minute summary you could share? And then I'll see what Rich and Steve can think about ways forward.
So we have something called a higher education access route. And students who are doing their exams apply to this, and there's a series of criteria by socioeconomic background and school and so on. If you pass a threshold, then there are places set aside which have a lower bar, so that the bar is lowered. It's better than nothing. I think it can be improved, and I'm hoping it's going to be replaced soon because of a committee that I chaired. But it's not going to solve the problem, because these problems are just endemic to society, and it's like a lot of interventions. They're not big enough. I mean, one of the things I was conscious about what Steve was saying about armies of admissions officers. We don't have admissions officers at all, because it's all done centrally. We get a spreadsheet, if you like, from our equivalent of UCAS. And there are disadvantages to that. So one, at the other end, if we have students, secondary students who are stellar, and they do well in competitions, in science competitions, places like Cambridge come over and just offer them a place, and we can't do anything about that, so we lose people at the very top to the good British and American places. But I think that's a relatively small price to pay. But people are very worried here about fairness, and that if the universities were making offers, that somebody's son or daughter would get an offer. People are hyper conscious of that in Ireland anyway. And it's a smaller country, so that is a factor, I think. A country where kind of, as you know, everyone knows everybody else, even though it's 5 million or whatever, we still seem to know everyone. But at least we don't have that problem of admissions officers, and that's a huge saving, I think, to the universities.
Okay, thank you. Rich, what do you think we can do about the diversity problem with the admissions / what was the other word you used?
Enrollment, admissions applications. Yeah, I was going to follow up on a point that Kevin made, which is, having a centralized system that relies solely on A levels that are an integral part of the curriculum I think it's a great feature of the UK system, and adding in additional entry features like writing statements, your portfolio, have you done charitable work? It's getting more into the US system, which is like they try to base it more holistically, but different students have different access to these activities, right? Not everyone knows about maths competitions that go on, and not everyone has spare time to work at charities at the weekend because they have to work, you know, in Tesco's at the weekend. So they don't have the time to build out their portfolios. So I'm, you know, I'm speaking for myself. I'm not Jill and Lindsay on this, but I think additional selection criteria works against disadvantaged students. And I think leveling the playing field where everyone is doing the same assessment is better. You know, I'm not saying it's ideal because, you know, as Stephen and Kevin said, like students from advantaged backgrounds have had way more investments over their life cycle than disadvantaged students. So by the time they get to do the tests, one group is disadvantaged against the other, but condition, like taking that into account, taking that as given, like we're not going to like have equal inputs for everyone. Having them do the same assessment seems to, you know, deal with some of the issues. And, you know, the US has the issue of like SATs. Some people don't even know you need SATs to get into college, and then they get told in their, you know, when they're applying, they need to do this. Whereas other students have been studying for their SATs for the last, you know, 12 months. And so, you know, keep things, I like the idea of a centralized grading assessment.
Done quickly in a short amount of time. And Stephen, final word on how we can solve these problems? No pressure.
You've put me on the spot, but I'd just like to raise a few other elements. And one of the issues that we know exists in the UK is an element of aspiration. There's a really nice paper by Michael Sanders and others looking at experimentally putting peers of students into high schools. So taking people who are current university students, sending them into high schools or communicating with students at high schools to say, well, actually, I'm like you. You can consider applying to a high status university, as I think the description that they use, and by seeing those role models, it actually increases the likelihood of students, even from deprived backgrounds, even applying for those higher status universities. In part because prior to that engagement, they didn't. There's a lack of belief or a lack of feeling. I don't see someone who looks like me going to this sort of university. So you almost need to break barriers about what people can aspire to. Now, post-application might help, post-qualification application might help on that, but you still need to break down the barriers to say, well, actually, I can attend that university as well. The other element that I'm going to just come back to is one of the biggest issues that we do have is that A-levels themselves don't necessarily reveal potential of students. We know, I mean, this is work going back 20 plus years. Robin Naylor has a paper going in 2001 that very much students from less well-off backgrounds, even conditional on grades, do better at university. Students from private school tend to do worse at a conditioning on the same grades. Now, identifying students with potential is very, very difficult when all that we have is a blunt instrument of A-levels. And contextual offers have gone some way to solving that, but there probably is still some way to go.
Absolutely agree. I'm delighted to say the thing I did this morning was 3 of our students went to a school in Hampstead, which sounds very posh, but it wasn't a posh school at all, to do exactly what you were talking about. So they did a teach-in with them. Because one of the things we find with widening participation is us going to to talk to school children, they kind of nod along, but when they hear it from a group of second year students who are 20 and, like you say, come from their own backgrounds, but we then struggle to find those students because we don't have enough of them. So it's that sort of finding the role models amongst the professors, amongst the lecturers, amongst the current students. All that cycle is so difficult to sort of get there. But I think the work that Steffi's working on in the Royal Economic Society, trying to get the diversity agenda everywhere, will hopefully help. And hopefully many of you will be able to join us for the January seminar that we run, which will pick up this theme around how do we get these students with potential and how do we make sure that they live up to their potential. So very good at my timekeeping today. Thank you very much to Kevin, to Rich, to Stephen, and to everyone else for joining us. We won't see you before Christmas, so I hope everyone has a very good Christmas and finally gets a break. And yeah, thank you to everyone for coming today. Yeah, Kevin?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Nice to see you all.